Hello, everyone. This is Katie Phillips from Tosa Together. Welcome to a Tosa Talks, Building a Diverse, Thriving Community, an ongoing Facebook Live series proudly sponsored by our generous friends at Bostic. Tosa Talks features 3 monthly presentations designed to provide meaningful discussions around racial and social justice issues to support the work of building an inclusive anti-racist community. Tonight's Tosa Talks features a discussion with Wauwatosa Common Council members Nancy Welch and Meagan Holman O'Reilly. We welcome and encourage you to take part in the live Q&A session tonight. Please be a part of the conversation by adding your questions and comments for our speakers into the Facebook comment section during the presentation. Now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's host, Catherine Reeby.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Reeby. I'm a member of Tosa Together. We are so glad to be here tonight for a discussion with members of the Wauwatosa Common Council. Please welcome Alderperson Nancy Welch and Alderperson Meagan Holman O'Reilly. Meagan Holman O'Reilly has represented Wauwatosa's 6th District since April 2020. She sits on the Government Affairs and Financial Affairs Committees and is the aldermanic liaison to the Library Board and Community Development Block Grant Commission. Prior to her service to Wauwatosa, she was elected to the Milwaukee Public Schools Board, where she served until 2015, and was twice selected by her colleagues to serve as board vice president. An experienced leader in Milwaukee's nonprofit sector, Meagan has been vocal about ensuring that we improve outcomes for families across the region. Her family lives in the Sheraton Lawns neighborhood, and her children attend MPS and Wauwatosa Public Schools. Meagan graduated from Oberlin College and received a master's degree in public policy from Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. Welcome, Meagan. Nancy Welch serves as the District 3 alderperson on the City of Wauwatosa Common Council. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Oberlin College and a Master of Architecture degree from UW-Milwaukee School of Architecture and Urban Planning. She is also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and holds certification as a housing finance professional from the National Development Council. She started her career as a neighborhood planner in Des Moines, Iowa, worked as a senior planner for the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission and the City of West Allis, and was a community development director for Auburn, Washington, as well as the City of Wauwatosa for 10 years. She is a founding member of the County Grounds Coalition and Friends of County Grounds Park, fosters dogs for the Wisconsin Humane Society, and loves to spend time enjoying the outdoors. Welcome, Nancy. So at this time, we are going to move into a presentation. Both of our alder people will present for a little while, and then we will have a time of question and answers. So please, you don't have to wait until they're done. Put your questions in the chat on Facebook, and they will be sent over to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you to Tosa Together for having me and my esteemed colleague, Nancy. I think that we're an excellent pair, not just because we are both proud graduates of Oberlin College that found ourselves here in Wauwatosa, but because we have really complementary backgrounds and obviously very different levels of experience in Wauwatosa and in the city's government. Nancy has just a really tremendous and rich background within the city, and I rely on her knowledge on development issues and her passion for her constituents as sort of a guidepost for a lot of what I do. And as she reminds me, I have a background in community organizing and public policy that's a little bit different than hers. So I think we make a good team to talk with you about you know, the work that we do on the Common Council and how it can and can't mesh, I think, with what's going on in the community on different issues. So I don't think I have a ton to present. I think Nancy and I are both really looking forward to hearing people's questions and spending as much time as possible on sort of, you know, what you're curious about, and also what makes the role of the alder both interesting and complicated. You know, when we can work on certain issues and when our hands are tied. But yeah, I don't want to. Nancy, do you have anything in particular that you want to start with?
I'm actually eager to get to the questions. I think it's so important that people have an opportunity to speak to elected officials and, you know, be heard and have their questions answered and really get an understanding of how the process works. I always like to answer the question of why I ran for public office. You would think that after years of working behind the scenes as staff, that I would have had enough of the whole political environment. But this problem happened. I showed up at a couple public meetings and I heard people told to be quiet. I was told to shut up. I was told I didn't have standing to speak on issues, which I thought was really funny because the topic involves some of the plans I did while at the city, and I thought I had a better understanding than the people speaking. So that made me say, enough is enough. The public deserves to be heard. We deserve to have, you know, a voice. And I've made it a goal for my elected office to try to include people, to make sure they know where to find the information they need to follow the meetings. And I think with that said, unless you want to hear my history working as the distressed planner of Des Moines, it's a good story. I'll leave it there and just open it up for questions.
Thank you to two of you. Could we start with some simple definitions, or maybe not simple? Could you please tell us what a common council is, what an alderperson is, and how one gets to be an alderperson?
Okay. I think I'm more than comfortable having prefaced this with how much deeper Nancy's experience has been on the Common Council, was saying, if I get anything wrong, Nancy, please say so. And if those of you in the audience don't understand entirely why I'm deferring to Nancy on this, as was mentioned in my bio, I joined the Common Council this time last year. So I have been to, I think, 3 face-to-face meetings with my colleagues that were between plexiglass, and some of us were wearing masks. It's been a very unusual year, and we've had just a tremendous number of issues to grapple with. And I certainly think we've worked really, really hard this year, but there are definitely times where I don't know whether what we're doing is business as usual or business because of COVID or civil unrest, just because I'm so new to this position. Luckily, having served in elected office before, I wouldn't have wanted to come into this position not having had prior service, because honestly, like, knowing how meetings are run, how committee process tends to work, the cycle of a city's budget in comparison to the state budget and other things that go on year to year, just like in any business, just like in any school, there's a rhythm to it. And so I knew that coming in. Otherwise, I think this year would have been a lot more difficult. But with that being said, I think that's an excellent place to start, because I learned those things both through academic and professional experience and through prior service. And I think unless you are a citizen who's paying really close attention to how this level of government works versus this level of government, and there are so many in Wisconsin, between elected judges and the county board and everything else, it can turn into a lot of different votes, different budgets, different acronyms. a lot of things that are going on. And one of the things that stymies people and that we're talking a lot about at the council level right now is the fact that we have 2 alders per district, which is, as we've learned, pretty unusual in Wisconsin. And sometimes leads to people, I like to think in the 6th district with my co-alder Allison Byrne, that people get a lot of a lot of support, particularly in the areas of sort of social justice and things like that. And in some districts, maybe they're only hearing from one of their alders. It's interesting, and we're debating it a lot in government affairs right now, if this is the model we should go with going forward. But so there are 16 of us on the council in 8 districts, 2 representatives per district. You're represented for you're elected for a 4-year term, and the terms are staggered. So I was up for election last year. I would be again in 3 years. And in that period of time, my co-alder will come up for election in between, so that you have some knowledge passed down, and you also just never have anybody who's brand new to the council or to a committee kind of all at once.
Yeah, I think, that covers a lot of the basics. I don't want to get too technical, but basically the Common Council is the group of elected representatives that is put in place to run the city, to make the decisions about the budget, to make decisions about economic development and parks and all of the things that affect the city. It's interesting because Wauwatosa also has a mayor and is referred to as a weak mayor government, which means the mayor doesn't tell the council what to do. The mayor, is the head of the council. The mayor is also referred to in the municipal code as the CEO for the city. Now, the city also has a city administrator who works for the mayor and common council to carry out policy decisions and handle the day-to-day management that otherwise wouldn't be practical with, probably wouldn't be practical with 16 alders under the best of circumstances. And in our case, I think it's important to point out, we are part-time. We are elected as part-time positions. We have minimal compensation. Don't confuse us with City of Milwaukee, which is a totally different type of setup. And I know there's a lot of confusion over that. We're part-time, we do our best. And when it comes time to run, you put in your papers, you get your signatures, and you answer lots of questions, take lots of heat. And if the people like you, you end up sitting on the Common Council. It's actually that simple. It's kind of like a small town. Just added to that, I just like to point out that I remember early in the year or a year ago when we were having a lot of very contentious meetings that I spoke to people who were sitting in the council chambers and they had a difficult time understanding the process. One of it was the distinction between the Common Council and the Police and Fire Commission and what those duties were. I like to point out that the state of Wisconsin does separate them. The rationale was that they didn't think police and fire should be a political issue. One can debate that, but that was the theory behind that. The other thing I like to point out, because many of the concerns for reforms revolve around community benefits or social services. And the way it works here in Milwaukee County is that the county carries out certain duties and gets funding to do certain things. So the majority of the courts and the social services, just to make it simple, are handled by the county, which is why sometimes it becomes complex as we start to deal with some of the social issues that involve programs that we may not have control over. So I'll leave it at that, and we can try to clarify as we move forward.
Okay, so I have a question. If someone's alder refuses to meet with them, is that allowed?
It's certainly allowed. We don't have a job description per se, or, you know, expectations. The only performance evaluation that an alder person has is their election. So and that's another thing we've been saying a lot in various committee meetings, is that the remedy is the ballot box. If somebody is not returning your messages or not supporting your views, that's where it's supposed to happen. And I'm glad to kind of have that come up, because we will have a number of, I think there's a potential of having a number of open seats in the next election, a number of seats that, you know, could stand to be contested probably. And I would encourage anybody who has a little nugget in them right now that they might want to go down this crazy road with us, that you should, and you should find a way to get in contact with me, and I would be more than happy to talk with you about what you would need to be doing now to make that a reality, but also why it isn't the worst idea you've ever had.
And I'd like to add to that, I'm often contacted by people, and, you know, they'll get upset if I'm not responding to their phone call within a few hours. And I have to say, the number you call is my home number. I do not have an office. I do not have any staff. It is when I have time to get around to responses. I can say that I try my hardest to get back to anyone and everyone who contacts me. And I try to make sure that whether you agree with me or not, or whether I like what you're saying, I'm trying to make sure that you have access to the facts, that I listen to what you have to say. I'm always willing to explain my thinking on things, because I think that's how we work together. 47,000 people are never going to agree on everything. So, but it is important to have those conversations.
Thank you. In this case, the alder refused to meet with the constituent. It wasn't like an unreturned phone call, but yes. So from what you're saying about the number of hours, the low pay, it would seem that there are certain people that just by nature of the job cannot really afford to take the job.
I mean, certainly, I'm not certain that I can really afford to do it, but I'm really, I'm passionate about public service. So it's kind of how I allocate my time that I think would be spent maybe otherwise in other volunteer work or sitting on boards or things like that. And that's just a choice that like my family has made for sure. But, you know, I think it's manageable. I think that, I mean, again, Nancy, you'll just have so much more to say about this because you've been doing it longer, but even this year, even when, you know, we sort of had this confluence of intensity of people that were very upset about, or very, you know, concerned about things that were going on with the pandemic. And then also with, you know, protests and other things that were going on. And the fact that, you know, I was trying to manage our kids and everything, you know, here, it's still, if you know, have good time management, I think that it's something that most people can fit into their lives. And so I would say before prejudging that it's something that doesn't work for you, if it is something that you're even mildly interested in, let's have a conversation and put the real sort of, you know, numbers to your schedule and see, because honestly, I know a lot of people who, you know, hold office at different levels. And the truth of the matter is that you know in your gut whether or not you're going to run for office or not someday. You just do. You know, and there are some people for whom it's just, you can, if there's a piece of you that can imagine it, then if this is the right time, let's talk.
Yeah, and I would say that's where the debate comes in over the part-time, full-time, 2 alders per district, 1 alder per district. Because for people who do work full-time, I'm retired at the moment, but people who do work or people who have families, that part-time is part of what makes it something that's doable. And something that opens the door, I think, to more people to be able to take it on. And to my mind, that's a way to include more voices on the council. It's, the way that you approach it, I think as Meagan said, it's the way you manage your time, and it's how far you want to dig. I think I have a broader background with the city. I dig into more things. I question what the staff say. I'm sometimes not well liked for questioning what the staff said, but that's something I do because I think it's important to work toward those answers. But that's what I do. That's probably above and beyond what many do.
Thank you. There's a comment here, and it says, I appreciate both of you for replying back to me when I have raised a concern. So I'm not sure who said that, but that's to both of you.
Well, we're
Thank
you. So we have a question, another question. How can we ensure that departments or the city follow through with equity and sustainability goals?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? For me, and I'm a policy person, and I'm by nature super pragmatic. So for anything that I'm working on, I want to break it down into, what's the end goal and what do we need to do starting tomorrow to make that end goal happen. That's why I'm telling you that you should talk to me about running for council now. And part of that process for me is what I mentioned before about knowing the cycle of a government body. When I appreciate when people contact us and email us about making changes to the city's budget when we're having hearings. But truthfully, that's the 11th hour. And that's not constituents' fault. It's just that by that point, the budget is baked. And so we can't really add new ingredients. And we can to a certain degree, and we certainly as alders do amend things and change things and make policy statements related to that. But truthfully, for these issues that are so important to us, the goal is that you get to the department heads and you get to the commissions and you get your ideas in their policy stream early enough that it's in their budget proposal to the council for the next year. And so that means that really, sort of getting something from what you want to be doing to having it actually be implemented can take longer than you wish, obviously. But knowing those cycles means that you know when is the right time to contact somebody about something, when to make a proposal, who to talk to, so that it is received well, versus, you will get, particularly from folks that really don't want change, that they will say, oh, it is too late to do this. It's too late. And, you should have come to me sooner. And so, the city starts putting together the budget in the fall. And actually, the department heads are already thinking about it now throughout the summer. So, I don't want to say it's too late for this coming year, but it's close, for big new ideas. Also, the fact that we have this money that's coming from the federal government presents challenges and opportunities, right, that we weren't expecting, related to pandemic relief. But yeah, I would say, whatever the piece is of the sustainability or of the equity and inclusion, that we need to be making those front and center now so that they wind up on the department heads' radar as they put their budgets together. Am I right, Nancy?
That's right. If you're looking at things that are going to be funded, and I think that's really important. I would also say, though, now is a perfectly fine time to start to initiate the conversations that may evolve into a policy decision that may get funded in a future year. It doesn't mean that there's no point. It means that it may take longer, depending on the resources that are needed. Sometimes you can come up with a minor ordinance change that will make a difference. And that doesn't take very long at all, as long as you have people with the right information at the right time willing to provide it. And I always say, and the most important thing, show up, speak up.
Well, we have question about that. It's how can citizens have input into how the stimulus money is being spent by the city?
So this is interesting. Nancy, because all of our meetings by Zoom, do you sit on financial affairs?
No, I'm on government affairs and community
Okay. And
affairs.
you're in one of my committees, but I couldn't remember which one. So we were just talking about this in financial affairs last week. And this has been on my radar for a couple of weeks. So I was really, really interested in that conversation. If I get like really wonky right now, or if I use too much jargon, like please let me know, or email me to clarify or whatever. I'm also gonna put on my glasses because it makes me feel smarter. Okay, so we are getting, I believe it's $25.2 million from the federal government as pandemic relief. And there are a lot of interesting things about that money. So first is that we're going to get it in 2 chunks. It doesn't come all at once. And it also is, I believe it's use it or lose it money. You have to spend it. It isn't the kind of thing that we can just put in a rainy day fund or whatever. There are lots of different ways that the federal government pushes money out. And so this whole overtime thing and you have to spend it with these different rules, sometimes they give the rules beforehand, and then sometimes rules are promulgated later. And that's kind of the situation we're in right now, is that they've said this much money is coming, but we don't have the final federal guidance on exactly the different ways. And it's really funny little technical things. Like there is a piece of it that says it should be spent on this, or this. And municipalities are going back to the federal government to say this, or this, or this, and this. So can we do more than one category, or is it an either or? And you think like that's not a big deal, but when it's something like broadband, infrastructure, or business relief, we would really like to do a combination of the 3, not just one. And so those are the things that are still being worked out by the federal government at this point, which means that the finance folks are sort of, they're going, okay, so we're probably going to have $12 million, which is a lot of money in what's ultimately, I think, a $200 million budget a year usually. And there's a consideration of how to do, the goal is to do legacy projects, things that really make a difference for the city in the long term. And then also potentially using some of the funds, and these are all just ideas at this point. None of this is real. That there would be the ability to use some of it to spend on projects that were already in the city's pipeline, which would then free some of the city's budget to do some other things with its own money that doesn't have as many rules attached to it. But there have been talks about things I've heard, just people spitballing some ideas about sort of like, well, we've done so well with the solar on City Hall and the library, and what if we were able to do refundable grants for the schools to do the same for their buildings? Like there's just a lot of talk about things that are related to our priorities, to sustainability, and then of course we've got different water main issues and different roads that need to be repaired. And then obviously businesses that have had some really, really tough times, and it doesn't matter how many times we go out to dinner, they still need, more support. Some communities obviously have really different needs than ours. And so they're going to be doing things like, some pilot basic income programs for their residents and things like that. Another thing that's really interesting is that there's some different blocks of money too that are coming from the state in different ways that also just go to libraries. So the library is getting a separate payment from just that. Oh man, see, I could talk about this for hours. I'm sorry. I'll leave it there. And you wanted to know how to influence what was going to happen with it. Part of what the finance director came to us about was the very first step of saying, the first thing he said is, I want to have a community engagement process. And I want to make sure there is input into how this is spent. And I was excited about that, because I'm always excited when somebody says community engagement before I say it. But that part of it was that it shouldn't be like most recent, if you filled out the survey about the the values that you would like to see in our next police chief, and it was literally just moving around boxes on a page. I do not want to do that with community input on how to spend this money. I don't want to give people 17 choices and make them rank them. That's not community engagement. That's checking a box. So I would really like to make sure, and we'll work to make sure that that the process is more engaging and authentic and meaningful than that, because this really is, like I said, it's sort of an opportunity to do some legacy projects in the city. Now I'm done talking.
I just want to say how happy I am right now, Meagan, that you're here. And just so people understand, there are 4 council committees and they meet opposite each other. So if you're on financial affairs, you are not able to attend or listen to what's going on in community affairs. And I sit on community affairs, which means I don't really have the opportunity to sit in and listen to the discussion at financial affairs. So this is all very helpful to have that perspective. What I can add to that is I think in past years, we've had energy funds that have come available. And what is always so tricky is the federal government wants to see performance, which means you're almost behind the 8 ball with having to come up with a project that's ready to go when the federal government finally decides what the rules are going to be. And they say, use it or lose it. My favorite is that every year the city gets an allocation of CDBG funds. But in order to meet the federal deadlines, literally the city has to come up with a way to spend the funds and take in the applications and everything before they even know what the actual amount of funding is going to be, or they will miss the deadline. And inevitably what happens is they're also expected to have the funds spent by November, but often don't even receive the funds to spend them till July or August. So this is the fun of working with the federal government. But I'm really hopeful that with the community engagement process, and if we handle it well, so people understand what the parameters are that we have to address, that we will be able to come up with some really good projects here that will really benefit the community.
Thank you. We have another comment. This is by, because she put her name, Whitney Rise Robertson. She says she's very grateful to both of you. So this comment was to both of you. A question maybe related to that. Does Tosa do planning out 10 to 20 years in the future? What are the priorities to attract and keep younger generations?
That's hard. That's really hard. I mean, especially because of how much the world changed in the past year. You know, and again, you're gonna experience my super pragmatic brain here. I have trouble sometimes thinking like super big because I'm like, but who knows? So we had a conversation I think this was in government affairs, might have been financial affairs. I don't remember. Maybe Nancy was there, but we had a conversation. Oh, it was in Council of the Whole. Nancy was there. We had a conversation with the Department of Transportation this past week about the expansion of I-94 again, and that whole east-west corridor, and whether they should do the double decker and everything they've been talking about for 30 years, right? And after we listened to that, I kind of pushed back on them, and I was like, you know, we hear all the time that there are fewer people being born. We hear all the time that there are, you know, there are going to be fewer cars on the road, particularly once we have more automation of vehicles. We hear all the time now that more and more people are working remotely or are going to be sort of having different patterns in terms of their commuting. So is this really the time that we need to be talking again about a generational change in our highway system? And their answer was funny. They said, well, that's why we're here presenting this to you, but we've actually decided to study it more. Okay. That was cool. All right. So what that says to me is that we really don't know a lot of things about the next 20 to 30 years. One of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is the birth rate, and just that we, are truly seeing a dip in population. And so it becomes a lot about sort of, if communities are going to be struggling to provide the kind of services that we want to provide for our constituents, but with a smaller population, a smaller tax-paying population, what kind of investments do we make now to, be able to maintain, what people call the Wauwatosa way of life, And I think that has a lot to do, it has to do with spending this pot of federal money well in, doing some of these, hopefully things that stabilize our infrastructure for a generation. It has to do with working to get the way, this is going to get super policy nerdy again, guys, I'm so sorry. But the way that the way that communities are limited in the way that they can tax themselves by state law. So we don't have, and Milwaukee suffers this worse than we do, obviously, but we don't have a lot of ways in which to dictate the way that we spend our own money because of state law. So, there are a lot of things that are sort of, not to say that it's not our responsibility, it is, but there are a lot of things that are outside of the council's control in terms of, where we're going in decades and decades and decades. And so I think all we can do is be really good stewards of, for, I think, with Nancy's expertise in terms of looking at development, and with, I think, my expertise of looking at sort of like policy and, and generational trends and things like that, and say, there are 20 suburbs of this city, and how do we make sure that we are the ones that are positioned to, maintain our population, keep our, beautiful new school buildings full of kids? How do we get there and make investments that are based on that?
I think that's, all really good. I started, once I was a neighborhood planner, then I became more of a long range planner. And I still remember when I first started working for Wauwatosa, I was told that Mayfair Road was the Gold Coast, and that there was nothing that was going to change and I shouldn't try. And I still have the memo I wrote to the council in 2003, in which I said, we are going to see, I'm looking at the market trends, and we are going to see a complete change of the types of uses and traffic and things along Mayfair Road, and we should start planning for that now. I also predicted that Roundy's warehousing would leave, and I remember the older person from the 8th district calling me in a state of panic, because she said she had previously talked to me saying, Wauwatosa is landlocked, nothing's happening, there is no change, I don't even think we need your department. And I said to her, there will be major changes coming to your district in the next few years, and what are you doing to be prepared to meet them? And the day Roundy's announced they were leaving, she called me in a complete state of panic and said, how did you know that? And that's part of the challenge. I don't really have a crystal ball, but I do look at markets and trends. I do see things that, concern me. And one of them is the idea that we will be driving less. The idea that, more and more people will continue to work from home. I'm concerned about overbuilding office space in Wauwatosa. I'm concerned about whether or not it will be possible, given all of the budgetary constraints, and levy limits is a much more technical thing I can discuss at another time, but whether we can actually afford to continue to have big paved alleyways, whether we can afford to sink, is it now $50 million into an East Tosa storm sewer, maybe it's 40 million potentially, to correct flooding, and whether that's a realistic expectation from people, that we can just continue to keep digging and putting bigger pipes in the ground, or whether there are more cost-efficient ways to address stormwater runoff. We need to be looking at that. And most importantly, as a landlocked community, we have a limited number of opportunities for new development. A lot of them over the past few years have come from manufacturing sites that have gone vacant. And it's been really important to be prepared with new uses to go in there. I think the next thing, we're going to have to deal with more vacant office buildings. I think we're going to have to deal with the decline of retail and what we're going to do to keep some viable retail in our community, but it's inevitable with the major retailers, that we're going to see more stores closing. We're going to see more national chains leaving. I personally think it's a really good time to invest in our local businesses and our local economy so that we are building things from the bottom up and not constantly relying on chasing national chains to fill space in our community. But these are very strategic decisions, and it's very difficult. Every year, it is true, things get tighter every year. But I also think the city needs to look more carefully about our spending. Are we hiring consultants that we don't need to hire? Is it more cost effective to hire a consultant or have staff on hand? We need to look at that. Are we making the right infrastructure decisions? Are we wasting our money? Are we making good housing decisions? With limited land, are we in fact addressing the needs of the community, or are we responding to developer demands? That's something that needs to be discussed. And at the end of the day, it's a crapshoot. I don't really know what's going to happen in 10 years. I can only make the best educated guess I can and plan for it.
Thank you. We have another question about developments, though it's a little general. In your opinion, how are all of these numerous developments in Tosa taking us closer or further away from equity goals? If it's taking us further away, what can we do differently? If it's taking us closer, how can we do more of it?
That is a it's that I could just sit and ponder that question for hours, which isn't really helpful for a format like this. But that is really the big question. I said that about something else tonight, didn't I? But that is really, it's a question of what are we setting ourselves up for in terms of development, the number of residents, and the pressure that puts on our infrastructure, while also facing these other sort of financial barriers that we were talking about before. It becomes even a bigger question, because you think about the resources in terms of the city budget, and as Nancy was describing, that just sort of we reach this point of sort of diminishing returns, is that as we add developments, particularly apartment buildings, and sort of the amount of resources that those generate to help sort of stand up other parts of our budget. But that doesn't really say much when we're talking about a housing market that is absolutely it's beyond exploding. I mean, it's demolishing, the prices and everything right now, and the turnover. And then if we have, mostly basically just high scale, fancy apartments also, it's we're not leaving a place for, a middle class in Wauwatosa, let alone even sort of folks that are striving for the middle class. So yeah, development is not my area of expertise, and that's one of the reasons why I lean on my colleagues who know more about it than I do. And I think that is actually, I would say honestly, something I could stand to spend probably a little bit more time. I'm a big fan of other governments. I love government, and just always where are the cities that are getting this right? Because they exist. And where are the places that have found the way to have the mix of residential development, walkability, and then an array of income and opportunity. Because, one of the arguments that we get a lot of the times on why we need to have more apartment buildings in the city is because of the jobs here. And yes, many of the jobs here are people who are doctors or nurses and who are making really strong incomes. And a lot of the jobs here are also people who are working in, sort of the cleaning and maintenance of our hospitals and also our other service industry businesses. And they, obviously deserve a really lovely and wonderful place to live in our community as well. So when we talk about new housing development for the jobs in Wauwatosa, we need to be talking about new housing development for all the jobs in Wauwatosa.
Yeah, I want to jump right on that because I think, that is so important. I think we've missed a huge opportunity over the past years as we've added thousands of market rate apartments to the city without taking into consideration what the right balance would be. If you're going to be a city and you're going to market land and convince developers to do something other than what they want to do, a hot market is the time to use that influence. I think it's also the fact that so many of these new projects have used TIF funds that, I think the city should have tied some sort of affordable housing component to our TIF policy so that as we have been adding all these 1,000 apartments, we're also adding more apartments of different types. I think the whole issue isn't just affordability, it's also, are people, having, condos, townhomes, units sized for families. Are we adding that to our community? So we're providing housing choice. I think also we've missed the boat to a certain extent because while we were being convinced that people working at the medical campus were going to live in these market rate apartments, what we've now learned is it isn't just the service workers who can't afford it, it's the first year medical students can't afford the market rate apartments. And they're now living in other communities and commuting to Wauwatosa because we missed that housing need and we didn't address it properly. I think there's a terrible tendency to do what I call design by numbers, which is called, we need money to balance our budget. Therefore, a $20 million apartment proposal is more important than a $15 million apartment proposal. But you've got to look at that a little more carefully and consider what the impacts of that is. Is it meeting a need? Are we filling our streets so that we now have to go and redo the streets and build them larger? Are we making our stormwater larger to address those needs? And there are moments when I just have to shake my head. A recent staff report for a 25-story luxury apartment building that was proposed, staff actually stated that we needed to approve it as part of meeting our equity goals. And I basically just shook my head and said, these people are clueless. They're not paying attention. And the final thing I'll say about that is in terms of equity, we also need to look at what maintains economic stability for families and individuals. And part of that is allowing people to own property because that's how you build that economic equity, which contributes to stability, which is something that has been missing for so many years. And if we can't do it with single family homes because we don't have a lot of space, we need to look more at things like condos and whether it's affordable condos, because let's not forget, condo ownership is a type of ownership. It is not automatically a big fancy apartment. And that's a way that people can build equity. The problem is the banks don't want to finance it. Well, what tools do we have in our tool chest that we can make that happen? And we do have things. We have federal funding access. We have a CDA. We have the use of TIF funds. We can access other funds. We have housing loans to look at. So we need to broaden our horizons and put on our thinking caps and make sure that we are, in fact, addressing community needs and not just responding to developer demands.
Thank you. And I just want to throw in that we have a dialogue tomorrow on housing issues, Tosa Talks dialogue event. And some of these things will, we had one on Saturday, so some of these issues came up, and I'm sure some will come up again tomorrow. So looking at the future and for future generations and for ourselves as well, we haven't talked at all about issues of climate change, issues of preservation of natural spaces, maybe the banning of clearing of old growth forests or virgin land. What does the city think or do about issues like that?
Well, the city has a sustainability commission that I would say has really led the charge in a lot of areas in just inserting the idea of sustainability and forward-thinking practices into a lot of what we do. I don't know how much of issues related, unfortunately, to global climate change kind of sit within the Common Council, because we could certainly pass proclamations, that say that we should halt deforestation or things like that, but they're really outside of the scope of what our employees are doing every day. There are definitely things that cities can and should do. I mean, we passed a straw ban, and obviously, as I was talking about before, sort of the solar panels on City Hall have actually, I think, been a really good, just a really good test case for the city in a lot of ways, in the sense of that they're working. Like, they're really working. And so even the folks that I think maybe environmental issues are not high on their priority list, they can see financially the difference that having these, on our building, and they're inobtrusive, actually, they're kind of pretty, that they see the dollar bottom line. This is helping our books, and they don't really care. Well, I can't speak, but I would say that there are folks that are less concerned about the fact that that is actually helping our footprint as a city, and the footprint that it does impact is the budget. So it's about, especially when you're talking about sort of a purple government, like the city of Wauwatosa is, we're a little bit divided ideologically at times, is that finding those ways that can be a win both to the fiscal conservatives and to those of us who lean sort of blue or green. That's the place where we can really shine as a city council. And so, I having not done this for very long, I don't have the greatest expertise, for example, on how many of our city's vehicles are electric, right? But that could be the kind of thing that we talk about. And then we talk about, as we're phasing out a vehicle as it sort of ends its life cycle with us, what are we purchasing, in relation to that? So those are the kind of things, that's the sort of nuts and bolts that we can get into at the city level, I think, and really make an impact.
Yeah, and I'll jump on that, because I think we've made a lot of progress. I sometimes get frustrated because, believe it or not, I had federal funds set aside to put solar panels on the Public Works building in 2009, and people turned it down because they said there was no return on the investment. But fortunately, yes, actually, but fortunately, I think we've come a long way in that. I do think, as a member of the County Grounds Coalition, it has been a constant fight for over 30 years to keep people from just building all over the county grounds. And it's it's terrible because there is nothing more attractive to a developer than free public land with public subsidies. Nothing makes the numbers work better than that. But the problem is we need to have increasing awareness of what that green space does. I think one of the things that really brought it to community consciousness has been the flooding that we've had over the past years that led to the construction of the detention basins on the county grounds, led to the expansion of Hart Park, which is actually designed to flood, to help deal with those floodwaters. But it gets back to my earlier comment, which is with the type of flash storms that we're seeing due to climate change, we simply cannot rely anymore on a concept that somehow we're going to miraculously put 2 tubes in the ground and all the water is going to run in there and no one's going to be inconvenienced and there isn't going to be flooding. It's beyond what we can possibly do within realistic constraints. And just to give you an idea, a few years ago, when the last time the village flooded and we have significant flooding, I looked at the stormwater profiles. We had intense heavy rain and both Honey Creek and the Menominee River shot up 10 to 12 feet, both of them, within a matter of 15, 20 minutes due to the heavy rains that had occurred both in the area and then further north on the Menominee. You cannot design around that. So we need to start changing our thinking and our expectations so we can, come up with solutions that work. And as a planner, I maintain ongoing certification. I'm watching courses all the time about dealing with sustainability and how to incorporate things. And thank goodness we don't have the challenges that many coastal cities are facing, but we need to start looking now.
Thank you. And our time is up. So I want to ask you this last question that someone has posed. If you can, give it in maybe 90 seconds or less. What are your top 3 priorities for our city?
Ooh. Okay, super fast. My first short-term goal is that I'm very interested in making sure that we, when we do aldermanic redistricting this year, that is done through the city's nonpartisan judges. I think that that's a really important thing for the city and for putting our stake in the ground that we believe in these nonpartisan fair maps process. So that's my personal nugget right now. I obviously, want to continue making sure that the lens of equity and inclusion is brought into all of our discussions and in a way that has metrics and that is feasible and tangible and not just sort of a bullet at the bottom of a slide, but that it is really embedded in the work that we're doing because that's what our community is asking for. So we need to meet that expectation. Plus it's the right thing to do. And I don't know what my third one is. Oh, and encourage people to run for council because I want awesome colleagues. I mean, not that my colleagues aren't awesome now, but if they're not going to run for re-election, I want awesome people to replace them. So
thank you.
It's a tough one because I think those are all good ones. I think I'd add to it voting rights. I think we need to make sure that we have a good process here in Wauwatosa and people have access. I want to make sure we have the right housing mix, and along with that, meeting equity goals, but I agree with the pragmatic approach. We need to start identifying specifically what the goal is and how we're going to get there. And then finally, I think we need to revisit our budgeting priorities to make sure that we are making the best use of the funding we have, because I'm looking at some of the facts and our assessed value isn't rising as much as you'd expect. And I still think the city hasn't fully dealt with the impact of increasing. Our debt's increased by over 500% over the past 10 years. We need to look at that. And we need to look at the way that we're using TIF funds and what those impacts are. And the full answer to that is longer than 90 seconds, so I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you to the two of you. I hope all our viewers will join me in thanking our guests, Wauwatosa Alders Nancy Welch and Meagan Holman O'Reilly, for taking time to talk with us tonight. Thank you, Meagan. Thank you, Nancy, for sharing your experiences and insights with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks also to you, our Facebook audience, for your time and interest, as well as your thoughtful questions. And as always, a special thank you to our generous friends at Bostic, whose support makes the entire Tosa Talks series possible. Please plan on joining us in May for Tosa Talks featuring Dr. Sean Lewis on mental health, as well as representatives from Milwaukee Metropolitan Fair Housing Council and the organization Courage Milwaukee. Recordings of all Tosa Talks can be found on the Tosa Together YouTube channel, and you can also feel free to reach us anytime on our Facebook page, our website, or by emailing us directly at tosatogether@gmail.com. Again, this is Catherine Reeby with Tosa Together, and it has been my pleasure to be here with our special guests, Nancy and Meagan, as well as with all of you. Thanks for being part of Tosa Talks and our mutual effort to build a diverse, thriving community here in Wauwatosa. Good night.